freaking record you so you do it. Just you and me alone.
I would have reapplied my lipstick.
Who cares? Your paper lipstick. Alright. So, I'll start now.
Okay.
Since you are a woman studies teacher, how do you think growing up in a very male-dominant household affects a child of female gender?
I think that if it's a male-dominated household, that means that the man is in power and that female authority is not seen as equally valued. And so that's going to have an effect on female children. They're going to, the way they view themselves and then the way they're treated within the family, and then the other types of relationships that they end up looking for outside of the family as they grow up. So I think that, for example, girls who grow up in families with authoritative fathers might gravitate toward that type of partner if they're heterosexual. And I think also that I don't even think it has to do with necessarily the it's reinforcing everything that a girl learns in the culture. So you're getting it from your family, but then it's also being reinforced every place else, that women are to be seen and not heard, that women are less than, that women are supposed to be second to a man. And even in terms of like politically, right, we still haven't had a female president in our country. People, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, couldn't see a woman in that type of position because it had never been done before, because women are not seen as being able to have that kind of authority. So,
Or like when people bump into you and you're saying sorry anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
And my next question is, when it comes to different types of families, from stereotypical to postmodern, which do you think is more frowned upon by society?
What type of family is most frowned upon?
Because I mean, there's families with single mothers or like LGBT, and then there's also families where it's like very stereotypical of like housewife, etc.
Right. I mean, I think we still, even though most families, there's a really great book by the historian Stephanie Kuntz called The Way We Never Were. We still have this nostalgia for like the family of the 50s, the like, you know, Leave It to Beaver, where mom stays home and takes care of the kids and dad is the breadwinner. But in actuality, most families weren't ever like that. But we still hold that up as the ideal. And so I think any family that isn't that is sort of sometimes viewed in society with contempt. But I think it is particularly true for single parent households, particularly single mothers. Single fathers, I think, are seen as more like, oh, you're doing so much for you're the hero, you're taking care of your children, hooray. Whereas there's more of a stigma against single mothers. And also, I think we're not quite there yet with LGBTQ families. There's a lot of people who think there's still like those stereotypes that they're going to make their children become gay, or that they're somehow child molesters or pedophiles. Like those still things, unfortunately, still exist, those stereotypes.
So would you say that's kind of like the bottom of the...
I would say so.
Okay, double check it's filming still. Okay. In raising your child, when it comes to gender, do you take any precautions to either raise your son in a stereotypical masculine fashion or gender neutral in any way?
I've gone out of my way to raise my son as gender neutral as possible. From the very moment that I found out I was having a son, first of all, I didn't want to know, because I know that gendering happens even before a child is born. My husband wanted to know, and so we decided, okay, we'll find out. But when I registered, you know, you go to like Babies R Us and you register for stuff, I was very like, I'm not doing any pink or blue. Like I'm doing neutral colors. Like his nursery was all like beige and brown and like giraffes, you know, it was very neutral. And then the clothing that I bought for him at the very beginning was all gender neutral. The toys that he was given were all gender neutral. Other people, though, did gender him. And, you know, we live in, as much as I as a parent have control, as soon as he goes to school, which he started daycare when he was 1, he's going to be influenced by other caregivers, other children. So he's going to have interactions. Also in my own family, the way my parents treat him, the way my husband's family treats him. So that gendering is happening regardless of what I'm doing. But I was very adamant that I wasn't going to gender him. And I think I've been pretty successful. Like, to this day, he's 7 and his favorite color is pink. He had a little doll. He named her Dolly, and she had like a little lavender bow on her head. He had a little lavender stroller that he would push her around in. So I gave him toys that were both, you know, that would
Just like let him pick.
whatever he wants to play with. Exactly. Yeah. And he was the one who initiated that. Like, at school, he was playing with the dolls, and the teacher said, "Oh, Harris is interested in the dolls." And so I asked him if he wanted one, and he said yes. So we went to Target, and he picked one out. And so, yeah. And I think that was actually a issue that was caused a controversy in my family, because I took this picture of him holding Dolly. And I sent it to my parents. I thought it was just like adorable. He's got like this little doll, and I think he was actually sitting on his potty. Like, he had like one of those little potty training things. He was sitting on that holding Dolly. And I took a picture of him and I sent it to my parents, and my dad completely freaked out. He's like, he's a boy. Boys shouldn't play with dolls, you know, and you're going to make him girly or you're going to make him gay. So yeah, I mean, not everybody agrees with
I mean, did that teacher call you and they said that in more of like a sassy way, or just
no, it
warning
wasn't.
you?
It wasn't like a concern. It was just like, you know, like, oh, this is what Harris is into right now in the classroom, because they had all these different like stations in the classroom. He would also play in the kitchen a lot, and so they said that a lot of it is at that age they're like imitating what they see at home. So he and I used to spend a lot of time in the kitchen together, because I would have to make dinner, and I was like, okay, you're going to sit on the counter while I do it.
Yes.
And I'd have him, as soon as he was old enough, I'd have him help, like, okay, pour this into the bowl for me, right? So he used to like the kitchen, and then he went through this phase in daycare where he liked to play with the dolls. So they were just like informing me, because I want to know what he's doing.
Small notes.
Yeah, they were not at all judgmental about that.
That's good.
But it was a university child care development center, so I think
they're
that makes,
like, we know.
I think that makes a difference for sure. I think if I had him in
a
some
regular daycare.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good that you made that effort. How well informed do you think sex education is in schooling from K through 12?
So I teach human sexuality here at SCC, and based on what my students tell me in that class, it is abysmal, the sex education that students get. And a lot of it is focused on, depending on where you are, like if you're in a private school, a lot of it is abstinence only. If they get any sex ed, it's abstinence only. And then for public schools, I've heard stories about like, oh, they separate the boys and the girls, and the boys get one talk and the girls get another talk, or it's just about like periods, or it's just about they try to scare you about sex. And so they all feel very unprepared, and like they're not getting a good education. So, and that was my experience, as well. But I'm older. But I remember there being like, they talked about birth control methods in like a health class, I think, and it was just very scary. Like, if you don't do this, you're gonna die, kind of a thing, right? Yeah. So I think that we need to do better there.
I mean, we only really talked about it for me in my bio class, and it was just like, this is an egg and there's a sperm cell, and avoid STDs and use protection. And they never I don't even think they said the word condom. They're just like, use protection. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
I don't know how it is for everyone else, but I think it's lacking, definitely.
Yeah.
What family dynamics do you see most with students?
I think, well, I teach I'm one of the professors of the marriage and family class here, and so we have a lot of discussions in my classes where students are welcome to share their own personal experiences. And it seems like families do a lot of damage based on what my students share with me and share in our discussions. A lot of them have been hurt in their families. And, some of that is their parents repeating what was done to them. So it's a cycle. And then part of it is like circumstances, like, parents splitting up and having a horrible divorce, or just a parent dying, or, like those kinds of circumstantial things. I have heard many, many stories of abuse in families. Unfortunately, that's really, really common. Both abuse of, like, usually the father abusing the mother, but then also the children being abused and growing up with that type of dynamic. So I've seen a lot of injury done by families to my students.
Would you say that being like a first child, middle child, last child, like things like that have had an effect, or like with children there's like a generalization of it, or like you see a lot of similar stories and you're like, they're a middle child? Do you think like that has an actual substantial effect?
I mean, I don't know what the research says on middle children. I mean, there's like the stereotype of the middle child, but I think a lot of it also has to do with other things that are happening in the family. So, like, were you the middle child when your parents when your parents divorced? Because the divorce is going to have an effect on you too. So there's a lot of different variables, I think, that play into it. So I don't like to necessarily stereotype, middle children.
I'm going to move this back just to get you more. Okay. To what extent do teachers address parenting concerns with students?
Like the way that they are being parented, like how your parents are,
like more masculine-ish, etc., kind of.
So I don't think that this really gets addressed by teachers, in my experience, unless you're specifically taking a class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to clarify that in some sense to see, like, if it's different, because as far as I know, it's more of, with schooling, it's the curriculum of, like, this is history, or X equals, or this is how you do science, or this is how you grammatically do something, but you're stuck in that from like a very young age all the way till 18 years old, like legally, and you're there 7 hours a week, 7 hours, 5 times a week, and so that's really that's a huge part of where you're being growing up, and you're lacking, if your parents aren't like good parents, like teaching everything, you're lacking like a huge amount of worldly knowledge and like wisdom and just like understanding of things, or how certain things work, or that's why common knowledge may not be so common.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that.
And then, how big of an impact do you think childhood has had on adult development?
Well, I'm a sociologist, so I mean, socialization is huge. I mean, and especially the family. That's like the major agent of socialization that we talk about. So the experiences that we have as children in our families is going to shape our whole life. And then as we get older, of course, we can change, we can learn about, like, oh, there's another way to do this, and I don't have to repeat what has been done in my family. Or maybe like it's a matter of like, okay, I'm out of the house now, so I can make my own decisions and do things the way I want to do them. But the family is just, it's the foundation of everything.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, I feel like it really is, and then in some sense, it's like if you go to therapy a lot, maybe there's a chance you'll understand things, but almost like how we were talking with Paul the other day, or like etc., that like people even afterwards, they're just so angry, this bottled up anger, that like even if they learn to suppress it or come up with like better ways of coping with it, it's just something that's always like there. So
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think you bring up a good point. Like with therapy and with education, I think it's possible to overcome some of these problems that we're talking about, but it's really difficult. Like that's part of who you?
Meeting's adjourned.
Okay.
Need to really
Are
take
you
care of.
okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Friend. Hey, friend. So yeah,
Okay.
we're good to go. It was just finalizing details, but we're fine. So.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, friend.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'll edit it a little bit. By the way, we're filming. It's okay. If there was a class that simply taught about parenting and what it takes, as well as the more productive ways of parental disciplining, etc., do you think the age at which people choose to have children would increase or decrease?
I think it would, the age would increase because people would have more of an understanding of what it takes to be a good parent. And yeah, I think that it would increase. I think that, for example, in my own personal life, I think one of the reasons why I became a parent later is because I was 10 years old when my brother was born. So I was old enough to really see what it entailed. Firsthand. Like, okay, this is a lot of work. This is, I saw the waking up in the middle of the night, and I saw the discipline issues with a young child. And so that stuck with me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wasn't entirely eager to start a family young.
Why do you think people are or there are a good majority of people who want to start a family younger?
Well, I mean, obviously there are issues, as we've talked about in our class, of the biological, clock. Yeah, I mean, women have, mostly for women, that we have a certain number of really good years to start a family. And so I think that impacts people, as it should. And then I also think I think it's romanticized a lot. I think a lot of people have kids for the wrong reasons. I want to have, somebody to love, or somebody to love me, or this is somehow going to save my marriage, or what other reasons have I heard? I want somebody to carry on my name. I just think that there are some of the reasons that people give for why they want kids are,
Not substantial.
right. You haven't maybe thought through them.
I mean, I do have a friend her mom had her when she was younger, and she was saying she wanted a kid at the age of 21. And just hearing that, it's almost, I feel like people see kids almost as pets.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand the responsibility having kids take.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's just because they don't have the experience with them? With you had it because you were 10 years old with your brother, or do you think it's just not taught at all? Or if you don't go out of your way to for example, how stereotypically girls do babysitting for
Mm-hmm.
side money,
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on somebody's, some people have younger siblings, some people have a lot of experience babysitting. I think people are ready at different times to have kids. I had friends who always knew they wanted to be parents, and they were ready, in their life to do that. And so more power to them. But I think a lot of people go into it not knowing what they're getting into. I've also heard the argument that having children younger, you have more energy, or you have more patience, more energy. I think energy is the one I hear the most. I don't want to be an old lady trying to chase around my kids, or old man chasing around kids. I don't know that that's
a legit reason.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't an issue for me, but being an older parent, I think another advantage of being an older parent is that you also have had just more time to learn and grow yourself. So having that knowledge is going to make you a better parent, perhaps.
Helpful. Mm-hmm. What level of emotional abuse inflicted on children do you find concerning?
Any emotional abuse is concerning.
I mean, some people where it's the slightest thing for them is something that triggers something on. I know some parents try not saying the word no, for example, or yelling can lead to so and so, but it's a lot of people don't take it too seriously. So I mean, is there a line in which if they pass a certain point, you're that wasn't correct, or like, because there's some points where it's like, oh well, they're just parenting, or they're angry or frustrated, where it's like it's not really abuse.
Yeah, I mean, how do you define abuse, and is that subjective? I don't know. I mean, I think that if a parent is being manipulative, if it is harming the child, whatever the intention is, or whether or not somebody else sees it as being abusive, if that child is being harmed by it, I think it's a concern.
And then my following question kind of goes over that in a sense, where why do you think a majority of people see physical abuse as actual abuse and emotional abuse as tough love or simply parenting?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's because the people saying that are older and they're parents and they don't want to feel as guilty, or do you just think that, you know, or a majority are like, well, I turned out fine, so...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. I think that, I mean, we're kind of taught in the culture not to. I mean, you could argue, like, you know, you're not supposed to be violent or to hit, or like physical, like there's physical signs of abuse, like a bruise or a cut, or, you know, like those kinds of things you can see, whereas emotional abuse, you can't really see it. It's not like a surface thing that you can easily detect. So I think that might have something to do with it.
All right, and then, are there things you try and avoid doing with your kid? Like earlier, I was saying that like some parents try not to say no, or you try not to raise your voice, or do you think that are there some like substantial things that you're like, this so has an effect, so I avoid doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And like, what are those things?
So there's two things that come to mind with that question, and one of them is specific to my particular child, and then one of them I think is something that I've learned as both as a parent and then somebody who studies these types of issues. And one of them came up in my class today. The more general thing is, how do you handle disciplinary issues? And a lot of the students in my classes will say that, you know, spanking or, you know, that type of punishment is good and useful, and it teaches kids a lesson, and they're not going to do it again. And so we actually had this debate in my class this morning. I've learned, and I grew up with authoritarian parents, and so there was spanking, and there was, you know, it was very controlling. But as a parent myself, I don't do that, because what I've learned is that more effective than spanking, because what spanking does is that maybe it makes the child not do that behavior again, but they're not doing it because they're afraid. They're not doing it because they understand, right? It's just like, I'm scared to get hit again, so I'm not going to do that again. Whereas if you take a different approach that isn't a physical approach, they're more likely to process, okay, what was wrong with what I did, and I'm not going to do it again because I truly understand what was wrong, right? There's a difference between those two. And so what child psychologists today really recommend, rather than spanking as a form of punishment, is to instead reward good behavior, like using positive reinforcement. So you see your child doing a behavior that you think is good or appropriate, you reward that behavior. And you can do that in many different ways. You can like reward them on the spot, or you can keep track on a chart like of good things that they've done, and then at the end of like they've got 10 good things, they get a treat or something like that, right? So that encourages good behavior instead of punishing bad behavior, and so then they're going to want to do the good behaviors because there's rewards attached to it. So I've never spanked my child, and he's a really well behaved kid, and to the point where all I have to do is look at him, really, and he like knows.
He knows something was wrong.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, for the example, the other night, he said something to me, really sassy. He kind of raised his voice at me, and I said, that is not how you talk to me or to anybody. And he kind of acted like a teenager, and I was just like, your words have consequences, your actions have consequences. And so for him, I knew what a good punishment would be. It wasn't to hit him. It was to take away something that I knew that he valued, and that was time with me. So he likes when I tuck him in, I read him a story, and I snuggle with him before bed. And I said, we're not going to do that tonight. And he was despondent to the point where he was crying, and he went up to his room and he wrote me a card. The front of it said, I am so sorry. And then you open it up. Dear Mommy, I am so, so, so sorry that I was mean to you. It will never happen again.
This is so good. So
right?
sad.
So all I had to do was say actions have consequences, and this is the consequence.
And I like that it wasn't even like, I took away your Xbox or like
Right.
nonsense. It was just like, well, then I'm not going to like do that. And the fact that it shows like how good of a parent you are, the fact that like you spend enough time where like he really truly enjoys being around you.
Right. And he really understood what he did wrong. So it wasn't like, if I had just hit him, the reaction would have been like, I'm upset now, and I got hit and I got in trouble, and like there wouldn't have been necessarily a processing
And
of
almost detaching from you.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so that's I think that's a general thing that I have learned about parenting, is that punishment, like physical punishment, is not the best way to achieve the kinds of results that you want as a parent. It's effective maybe in stopping a child from doing a certain thing or repeating a certain behavior, but in terms of like getting them to actually understand and to have a good relationship with you. I also think it's hypocritical because we teach kids not to hit, and then like we're hitting them. So it's like, okay, how does that work? Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to say about this question is more specific to my child. So my kid is a perfectionist. Everybody okay?
Yeah.
My kid is a perfectionist to the point where he gets really, really upset if something, like if he's doing his homework and his like letters aren't perfect, or he's doing an art project and he doesn't like the way his picture turned out. He'll like cry, or he'll crumple it up and throw it away and have to start all over again. And so I've done research on this. Like, okay, what does this mean? Why is he like this? Where is he getting this from? And how do I handle it? And what I've learned is that it is a sign of gifted children, which he is, and that it's the best way to handle that is to focus on. To first of all not use the word perfect with them, which is hard to do because we throw that word around a lot.
Like vocab word.
Yeah, it's a vocab word. So I can't use the word perfect with him. And then I also have to like encourage him to like work on the like understanding the joy of the process rather than the end result. And so that's like a constant thing that I'm working on with my kid. That's one of his issues. So I think every kid has certain issues, and like as a parent, it's your job to figure out what that issue is, what's causing it, and how you can best address it.
Yeah. Plus, rather than say like you are this gifted child and you're like so perfect and blah blah blah, like as much as I feel like when you give people higher expectations, they rise to the occasion. With children, it more feel like pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I think that's good in that sense. How much do you think having a 4-year mandatory high school class on sex ed and parenting, along with worldly education, which in defining that I would say is like just like morally standing things that most of society agrees with, would help with kids and like adults, because you know their childhood affects them as adults.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, I think that if we had mandatory sex ed and parenting classes, this would be a completely different world. Yeah, I think it would be a better world for sure.
I mean, in choosing like this question, I initially started out with there should be like parenting licenses, but you know, of course you can't do that because people would like lose it. But it's just like, and thinking of it like that, I knew that, or like discussing it with people, they were like, well, even if it helped like one kid, you just saved like one kid's life, like in having this class. And I feel like it would deter people who aren't ready to be parents and end up neglecting their kids to like, okay, kids are this and this and this and this and all this work. Like, I don't actually want one, you know?
Right.
Like, it would tell you about all the work it is, and then you decide if that's, like, rewarding enough for you, along with, like, you know, just understanding that people and living beings should be respected and on an equal playing field. I feel like it would help with, in nature, we were talking about how there's always like this competition of like, if you're not on this side, then you're like against us. And even with like, there's politics, other sides, or sports teams, or schools, like there always seems to be pitted against each other. Whereas I feel as though learning these things, because in your class or like classes I've taken, I've learned more of them, but I've gone out of my way to do so. And that's because like that's what college is, but some people don't go, or some people don't take those classes.
Right.
Whereas like, you know, high school is mandated by the government for 4 years. So I think in taking a class like that, like it would just help people understand. And if at the end of the day, like I think that the more educated we are, the more like conscious we'll be of our choices. And even if there are like some stragglers behind, I feel as though a majority of people would benefit.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I think it's unfortunate that you have to wait until college. And as you said, not everybody's going to go to college to take these kinds of classes. It would be wonderful if everybody had that opportunity. I think that not only would it make you more aware going forward, like if you want to be a parent, first of all, and then second of all, being a better parent when you become one. But I also think in these types of courses, there's a lot of self-awareness that happens, like just a better understanding of yourself and who you are and who you want to be, and so that you're better able to make choices for yourself and to control your own future.
Yeah. Plus, even with like, this is like a kind of off topic, but like with, you know, how there's families and there's like LGBT families which have like a stereotype against it. I feel as though like an understanding where people come from, or like the strife, or like the process that goes between them, even if it was just like for one unit, you'd still have that in the back of your head. Whereas rather than you see them as like the against team, like
the other, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And then, do you think a class like this would have bad influences on teenagers? And I say this because I feel as though there would be an outcry of like parents who are like, are you saying I'm a bad parent? Or like, who said the government can't choose how to raise my kids, etc. But if that was like the reality, then why are you sending them like 8 hours a day, 8 hours, 5 times a week? Like, they are raising your kids. Like, parents, church, media, and teachers are the things that influence people like
outside of the family. Yeah, absolutely. I do think there would be pushback from parents. I mean, especially if you're talking about human sexuality. I mean, you know, people are very uncomfortable with having that be taught in schools, unfortunately. Like, you still have to get a permission, you have to get your parents to sign a permission slip, right? And a lot of parents will say, I don't want the school to teach my kid, but then they don't end up teaching their kid, right? So the kid's not getting any education except for what they hear from friends or what they find on the internet or pornography or whatever. So I think if you were to call it a class, like if you were to call it human development,
how like sex ed and parents.
Yeah, then I don't know, you might have a better time selling it. It's like how you package it.
Yeah, I think also with like trying to gear towards facts and stuff, and just explaining certain dynamics and all dynamics, that way it's not like geared to one side.
Yeah.
In my psych class, we were talking about characteristics of like teachers, or, you know, infamous teachers we've had, and like someone said like liberals, and like I don't know, it's just that they like classify all teachers as like liberals, or we're just trying to like.
Is that a class here?
Yeah, that was my Psych 100. But and just hearing that, it was like, I feel like in caring about just a common decency between people, that's like liberal, almost just like because you don't have a side. So I don't know. I think that it would be an outcry, but I know it influenced teenagers a whole ton, which I feel like is bad. And, you know, anything that says it influences kids is hard to like pass, but everything does without us like consenting to it anyway.
That's true.
And then my last question is, how does raising boys and girls unequally affect society, and specifically with girls?
I think that if you're raised with the idea that you are less than, that you're not as valued as, that is going to affect your self-worth and what you think you're capable of. And I think that's what happens to a lot of girls. So I think that affects their self-esteem, that affects the kinds of jobs that they go into, right? They think, okay, I'll be a nurse and not a doctor. Even though they have the intellectual ability to be a doctor, they're not able to see themselves in that role because they've been socialized to believe that they are not capable. So I think that type of, those type of gender messages, particularly that girls get, is unfortunate. I think ideally, if we lived in a society where everyone was just able to live a full and self-determined life, like, what is it that, what's your capability? How far do you want to go? How far can you go with, what you were born with? Ideally, if everybody was able to kind of fulfill their own potential, we'd be in a much better situation.
It's also with, like, there's a whole thing on girls where it's, boys can date, like, whomever, and, like, girls can't, which almost, it almost puts girls, like, the sacred lamb or, like, the trophy wife or, like, this closed off, like, guarded thing, whereas guys, if anything, we're saying, like, who cares, and, like, just throwing them out there, along with, like, boys don't cry and all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for boys, I think that's the issue for them, is this idea that you have to be tough and not show emotion, not ask for help. That takes a toll on men throughout their lives. Are you going to be able to, even in something as simple as men don't seek mental health care when they need it, or like if something's wrong with them physically, their body, they see some symptoms of something, they don't go and get checked out for it, right? Because, I'm a guy, I'm tough, I can handle it, right? And so I think that so that ends up hurting men, both, they're physically, like, you're waiting to get treated for something, and then you find out, like, oh, you have cancer, right? It's too late. This happens way too often with men. And then also with mental health, like, they're not getting treated for their depression, and that's unfortunate. It's not fair to them either. So yeah, for both boys and girls, I think that there's harm that is done by this gendering that happens.
I feel like it almost causes guys to act out and do, like, this rebel stuff, but then even with that, we just label it like boys will be boys.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's really just like we're seeing them as invisible and almost like grow up, like throwing them out into the world and seeing how that turns them into, and we assume they all turn out the same.
Right. Yeah.
I agree. All right. Well, that wraps it up.
All right.
Do you feel drained?
Yes.
All your opinions have been thrown out there.
I hope it was helpful.
It was. And it also, like, I wanted to talk to you rather than, like, I could have talked to, like, my child development psych, just because you're, like, a professional. You went up to, like, Masters of Sociology, which is a branch of psychology. Mm-hmm. So it's, like, validating, like, your opinion is professional to validate in the sense of, like, these things are problems, like, there's facts behind it and studies, whereas, people can always deny whatever they want.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yes, I think that's what I love about the social sciences. It's not like this, it's not like this wishy-washy, like, these are just my feelings or opinions. Like, there's actual research that's done on this.
Yeah, and that's why it stands.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.